I have the privilege this afternoon of talking to Dr. Ellen Williams, who is the head of ARPA-E. So let's start off, just in case people don't know, explain very briefly what ARPA-E is, because it's really one of the more interesting, fun parts of the federal government.
So ARPA-E is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. It's a relatively young agency that was created in the Department of Energy about 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the job of ARPA-E is to look out for new innovations, high-risk technologies, technologies that are cutting edge, that have come out of the blue sky from new entrepreneurial ideas, and give them a short, quick infusion of funding to help those ideas get developed and moved forwards so that they can move on to a commercialization pathway and get out into the private sector and impact our lives.
When you say a short burst of funding, what is short?
So typically we fund projects at about $2 or $3 million for a period of 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. And we should mention, because I think people here will be very interested, that your annual budget's about $300 million.
That's right.
So, and how much of that do you give away in grants each year?
We give 90% of that goes for grants and the other 10% in operations.
So you're a sought after person here in South by Southwest. So your mission, or the mission of ARPA-E, is to foster disruptive technologies.
That's right.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a special power while we're sitting here.
Okay.
What's the one special technology or disruptive technology you'd really like to see happen? If you could snap your fingers and make it commercially viable, what's your top priority?
Well, my top priority would be pure, clean power generation that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without interruption, non-intermittent renewable power. That would be my one big ask.
Just clean, because that would hit, let's see, your mission is energy efficiency.
That's right.
Energy security. Yep. And climate change.
Yeah.
So 24-hour emissions.
Yeah.
Okay, excuse me. Right. Yeah. Your mission is not to foster climate change, it's to. So a clean energy source would hit really all three of those.
It would. Energy efficiency, we can tackle in slightly different ways. On the other hand, if we had infinite cheap energy, we'd be less worried about energy efficiency as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're from the Midwest.
I am.
You're from Oshkosh and then grew up in the Detroit area.
That's right.
Home of the auto industry in the United States. What needs to happen with the auto industry? Let's talk about that for a second, because that's such a big consumer of energy, and it's so difficult in some ways because it's very consumer facing.
Yes.
Every few years when I buy a new car, I get to decide, do I want to buy, well, it used to be clean diesel. I don't think we're going to have that choice for very much longer. But so what needs to happen to that industry? Because this is sort of a difficult period where really the consumer meets energy and energy consumption.
Yeah, well, the consumer meets energy, and many times the consumer doesn't choose energy efficiency. They choose sexy or big, and that's a real issue. The automotive industry actually is quite innovative, and they're being pushed by CAFE standards to drive down to have higher mileage vehicles, and so they actually do a lot of innovation, and we have some nice partnerships with the automotive industry. I think that what needs to happen is still in the thousand flower bloom stage.
Okay.
So we're looking at far more efficient traditional engines, and there's a lot of work that's going on and can still go on in making internal combustion engines work a lot better. We're still looking at the possibility of biofuels as a way of reducing the emissions from the fuels that we use. And then we're looking at a variety of different types of electric vehicles. They could be based on fuel cells, they could be based on batteries and battery charging. And then the new kid on the block is autonomous vehicles. Right. And autonomous vehicles is going to make a huge difference, I think.
In terms of energy efficiency?
I think in terms of energy efficiency. So
Google's been testing one of its cars here in Austin.
That's what I heard,
I haven't seen it yet, but I've been on the lookout for it.
But an awful lot of energy is just wasted by our rotten driving habits. And if you've got an autonomous vehicle that can automatically adjust to everything around it and tailor its driving to be optimum, you could save a lot of energy just that way.
So you're talking about cars getting more efficient and CAFE standards, which over many years have been ratcheting upwards. But we have this midterm review for CAFE standards coming up in 2016, 2017, in the next 12, 24 months. consumers are starting to buy bigger cars again. We were on this period going from 2008 on where
Yeah.
the cars were getting more efficient. There's going to be a little bit of friction coming up, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where the car companies are going to say, well, we can't increase these CAFE standards because we can't sell the cars. I mean,
Yeah.
is that a concern of yours? Is there anything that you're working on that would address that?
Well, I mean, it is a concern. I think what you'd always like to do is to deliver for consumers the benefits they like, the big cars, the fast cars, without the drawbacks of using a lot more fuel. And so a lot of innovation around being able to, you don't want energy efficiency to be like castor oil. You want it to be
Right.
pleasant.
Right.
So making it work in a way that delivers what people want is a big part of our focus.
Well, and in some ways, that's kind of the unfortunate lesson from what's going on with Volkswagen right now, is that they were selling a car which had clean emissions, but it was fun to drive.
Yeah.
You know, it had great pickup, and it appears now that it was kind of a fantasy that they were selling.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is sort of one of the issues that's, at least on the consumer-facing side, is a struggle. People don't necessarily, some people want to drive a very efficient car.
Yeah.
You know, love the Prius where it tells you, you know, you're getting averaging 50 miles per gallon. You're sort of playing a game with yourself to get, but most people don't. They want the conveniences of modern life, and that's really a difficulty.
Yeah. But, you know, I think we also have to, there's probably some people in this room who are old enough to remember some of the gas crises of the past, and I've sat in gasoline lines when we didn't have enough gasoline for our cars, and it was a pretty scary situation. And we've seen this boom and bust cycle come and go. So oil prices are low right now. Gas is inexpensive. I love it just like everybody else loves it, but I don't believe that's going to last. We'll go back through this again.
We have very low gasoline prices right now, under $2 in many places.
Yeah.
Natural gas prices are low, coal prices are low. That must be a real struggle when you're trying to incentivize and when you're trying to foster renewable energy technologies.
Yeah.
I mean, does it help or hinder?
Well, it certainly for us, you know, all of our project teams, we're always working with our teams. They've got 3 years of funding with us. We're always working with them and saying, at the end of this 3 years, we want you to be able to go out into the private sector and get follow-on funding to keep developing your technology.
Right.
And this atmosphere for some technologies does make it more difficult. The market pull is weaker than it was 3 or 4 years ago. So that's one of the realities of life, yeah.
So you've worked in the private sector.
Yes.
You were chief scientist at BP. You're obviously in the government now, and you've been in the government in the past, and you've also been in academia. So give me a sense of sort of 3 major areas which foster innovation.
Yeah.
How do they, looking at the challenges we face, the need to create new and better forms of energy, where does the innovation come from? And how do those 3 sectors play with each other? Because, I mean, that's sort of one of the challenges.
Yeah.
You're obviously in the government, but you're working with the private sector,
Yeah.
and some of your fundees are academic. How does that, give me your sense as to where innovation comes from and how those 3 sectors play.
Yeah, well, I have to say, from my experience with ARPA-E now, I would say that innovation seems to be a very potent human motivation. People really seem to like to innovate, and we see our project teams coming from all over. We see 2 guys in a garage, you know, trying to develop a technology out of one of their PhD theses. We see small family businesses. We see big businesses. We see a lot of university work and work coming out of the national labs. And I think a really interesting thing about a lot of our project teams is that they tend to be a mixture. About 80% of our teams have members from more than one of those categories. So we'll have the small business team working with a university team. We'll have a national laboratory working with a large business. And so I think that there's a lot of innovation that comes at the interface of the different kinds of experiences. The academics are, you know, pie in the sky, we've got this great idea, it's going to be wonderful. And then the big business guys are like, yeah, that's wonderful, it's great, let's make it work, but we know you're going to have to do this, 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 and this before you actually are going to be able to sell a product.
So ARPA-E has been in existence for 5, 6 years?
6 years, yeah.
Now, I know we're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the ideas that you're very excited about that are being funded, but have there been any projects from the early days of ARPA-E which have made it to the marketplace already? Any success stories?
Oh, yeah. So I think two areas where we have really good success stories are in grid level storage.
Okay.
So this is big batteries to store energy for the electric power grid. And we funded a lot of work in that. There's been tremendous breakthroughs. And we've got several products now that are on the market selling.
That you funded or
that
you've
we
helped
funded.
develop?
We funded. They're no longer funded by us, but they kept going afterwards, and they now have products on the market. We're seeing that quite a few of our teams are selling some of their products with the first markets overseas. If you're doing grid storage, you want to go to a place where they have unreliable electricity, because then they really have a demand for your product. So they need to de-risk their technologies and demonstrate that they work, and in some cases, taking them overseas and doing that is looking like a good strategy.
And ARPA-E is okay if the market is overseas? It doesn't necessarily need to be a domestic market?
It doesn't need to be a domestic market, but it needs to be domestic manufacturing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. For how long? I mean, once you fund it for 2 or 3 years, can they turn around and say, well, we're scaling up, or we're going to set up a factory in China?
Yeah, we'll let the lawyers deal with that one. There's
Okay. Is there my question is, for the 2 and 3 years, obviously you can say we're not going to fund you unless you're manufacturing in the United States. What do companies agree to going forward? How many years do they have to commit to?
It's an open-ended agreement, but they're allowed to manufacture overseas if they sell overseas, manufacture in the United States if they sell in the United States. And then, of course, their technology will evolve, and at a certain point, they'll come back to us and say, this is no longer the technology that you funded. So
Tell your lawyers to relax. Okay, fair enough. So how do you measure success? How do you measure the success of your investments?
Yeah. Well, we measure our success. First of all, we measure our success just by being very closely engaged with all our project teams. So each of our teams is assigned a program director, a technical person who works with them really closely, and a tech-to-market advisor, a commercialization person who helps them move their technologies forwards in ways that are going to move to the market. So we actually are constantly personally evaluating those teams and seeing their progress. And so there's an intense...
How often will they be on site to kick the tires?
Quarterly.
Quarterly.
Yeah,
okay.
So 4 times a year they're on site, really talking to teams and giving them guidance and feedback and support. So that in itself is our primary way of knowing what's going on and really kind of assessing what its value is. Coming out at the other end, we're looking a lot at what happens to our teams after they finish with our funding. About 20% of them that have completed funding with us have now gone on to get private sector funding. I think that's a pretty good statistic. And another 20%, they might have earlier stage projects, a little higher risk, have gone on to get funding for further development from other government agencies.
Okay.
So that lets them continue a development cycle when they're not quite public sector
20%
ready.
to the market, 20% continuing development. The other 60%?
The other 60%, those people take their knowledge and what they've learned and they move back into the communities, and it feeds back into the innovation cycle.
If it was baseball, that's Ted Williams' batting average, so that's not bad. In the 1970s, there was a burst of innovation in energy. And then in the early 80s, oil prices dropped, and innovation really entered a long fallow period.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen again?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
I think the big driver is something we've talked a lot about at this conference, is that we now have a really significant motivator, which is climate change and sustainability. So we absolutely have to change the future of energy to save our planet. And so what happened in the 70s was there was an oil shock. When the oil shock went away, the terror went away.
Right.
But climate change is not going to go away on its own.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So in the 70s, there was the national security, the energy security. When that relaxes, we relax. But this time, the motivation's different. Okay.
It's very different.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the tech world, innovation happens seemingly at the speed of sound. Energy is different. Innovation is slower. How do you speed that up? How do you speed up energy innovation so that it approximates or at least starts getting closer to what we see in the tech world?
Well, I think it's never going to be as fast as you see in the tech world. Just
because
you're working with physical systems, and you actually have to build or create a actual object, and that takes time and effort. That part
versus just coding something.
Yeah, well, and I've done some coding. I know it's not that trivial.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
But you do have to run around and find the connector and find the supplier and make these things all work. And then you have to work on the scale-up issues as well, which is you can make a small object that works in your laboratory, which is great and it looks wonderful. But then the next step is, well, what if I have to build 1,000 of these?
Right.
Can I do it quickly and effectively? And that scale-up issue is a big deal.
So how do you speed up? And do you agree that speeding up innovation is necessary?
Absolutely. Well, I think one way to speed up innovation is, first of all, you pick your project teams when they're ripe. Okay. So you need to find a team that's really identified an opportunity. And they're ready for it. They've got things poised to go, as opposed to kind of going earlier stage where the team might need to do years and years and years of development work. What we've got right now is at least 30 years of amazing innovation in the physical sciences and computational science and engineering. And that has really created almost a toolkit of innovation. And a really smart innovator is now reaching into that toolkit and pulling ideas out and figuring out how to put them together and make something run. So picking people who, first of all, understanding what's in the toolkit and where the opportunities are, and then picking people who've got the great ideas to move them forward is really important to accelerating innovation.
Well, I want to ask you one last question, then I think we're going to go to a couple slides
Okay.
about things you're funding, and then we are going to have a brief time for questions from the audience. So if anyone is interested in asking questions, sort of begin preparing and formulating, and I know we have one mic up here. So you've said in the past that in your heart, you're a true geek.
I am.
What are you geekiest about?
Oh, what am I geekiest about? In general, or?
I'm going to leave that to you.
Okay. Well, you know, I like big equipment.
You like big equipment?
I do.
You're in the right job then.
Yeah.
Power plants, what are we talking? Caterpillar?
A Caterpillar tractor. Now that's great.
Have you ever visited the oil sands with the giant
I-
three-story trucks or four?
Well, actually, I visited not that part of the oil sands. I visited the part where they do it underground
The
with
in-situ mining.
steam. The
Oh,
in-situ
well, you
plants,
missed a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Just a few miles north are the
Yeah.
biggest trucks in the world.
Yeah. Well, I visited Biofuels Farm where they got huge harvesting combines. I visited an offshore oil rig. That's an
BP
amazing
was very
setup.
involved in biofuels for a couple of years.
was, yeah.
Did that overlap with your time there?
It did, yeah.
Well, why didn't, in the late 2000s, remember President Bush talking about switchgrass during the State of the Union? There was this great excitement
Yeah.
about advanced biofuels, but
Yeah.
it never seemed to come to fruition. Why not?
I think it's still got a shot.
Okay.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about that. One thing that, of course, really kind of slowed things down is everybody at that time expected there would be a carbon price. And a lot of people who were investing kind of preemptively thinking up the road there's going to be a carbon price and I'm going to need to be prepared for it.
I see.
And when the carbon price didn't come through, the market opportunity wasn't as clear.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've got a clicker,
Okay.
and you wanted to share some. Now, are these technologies that you're currently funding?
Some of them are technologies that we funded before that
Okay.
are doing well, and some of them are technologies that we're funding now. So how are we doing here?
Let's take a look.
Okay, so I'll click through them really pretty fast. Given my professorial background, I could spend about an hour and a half on these, but
Well, give us a flavor of what each
Okay.
one's like and
All right.
why it excites you.
Yeah, okay. So let's see here. Is this? There we go. So this is Makani. It's one of the first projects that we funded at ARPA-E. It is a wind-borne air turbine. And this is basically a small vehicle that can be released up into the air, flies self-autonomously. It has a tether going down to the ground, and it does this looping activity while it's got spinning turbines on it that are generating electricity that can be sent down the tether to Earth. And this is important because at the normal levels of a wind turbine, the wind is very sporadic, it's unsteady, it's only available in certain parts of the United States, but if you go up to 100 meters, 300 meters, there's a lot of wind and it's very steady. You could expand wind power from about 15% of our geography to about 85% of our geography, or take it offshore with this.
And what's really cool, if I remember correctly, is that if the tether breaks, it's programmed to just fly itself down.
It is. Yeah,
Just kind of-
and that was actually what we supported them to develop.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that was one of the key barriers to their development of this technology. And when we supported them back in 2009, they solved that problem, and then they were able to be picked up for follow-on funding. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so that's Makani. Here's another one, a little hard to see what this is all about. This is one that I think has a real potential to be earth-shaking. We're still funding this one. The idea here is, well, it has to do with how surfaces reflect and absorb and emit energy. So you all know that when we go out in the summer, we like to wear light-colored clothes because they reflect sunlight, we don't get as hot. You also probably also know that every hot object emits light in the form of infrared radiation. That's one of the ways we cool off, is we're constantly emitting infrared radiation even though we can't see it. So the idea with this type of a panel is that it's designed to be completely reflective to sunlight, to all the colors of sunlight, except for the far infrared. In the far infrared, it can emit radiation. So imagine you put this on top of over your head out on a summer day. You go out on a summer day, all the sunlight's being reflected, so you're not heating up. You're kind of hot because the air is hot around you, but the infrared light that you're emitting from your body is getting sent out through this surface and away, so you're cooling off.
Now, is this for a commercial build or buildings?
They're designing it for commercial buildings. It has a lot of different applications. It could be used, I'd love to use it on the roof of my car. Wouldn't that be super? Come back to your car and it's not hot, it's cool. Didn't have to run a battery or anything to drive it. We're also looking at technology like this for electric power plants, which might have to, electric power plants use water for cooling. In dry areas, that's a big problem. So if we could use a technology like that, we could get away from that water use at power plants. So, but the really neat thing about this is that it's fundamentally different from your normal air conditioning. What does your normal air conditioner do? It takes a hot air in your house and it shoots it outside, you know, blasting hot air onto your neighbor. In big cities, this is a problem. That's urban heat islands. This doesn't blast the hot air out to your neighbor. It blasts the hot air, well, not the hot air, the heat out to outer space. So it's, you know, it's completely different. It's transformational.
You want to share one more before we go to questions?
Sure enough. Oh, this is other lab. This is really cool. So this is a little robotics problem. So when you're doing solar energy, you'd like to have your solar energy collector always pointing directly towards the sun to get the best collection angle. And so basically you have these kind of dumb robots that are a bunch of gears sitting under your solar panels, and you've got to control them very precisely, and it's heavy and it's massive and very expensive to make these heliostats that move the panels around. The team at Other Lab had an idea to completely change that, replace all that heavy metallic machinery that has to be machined to very precise specifications with something soft and flexible, plastic bellows, very inexpensive to manufacture, and the control is by putting pressure inside the bellows so they expand and contract. And they've
So it tracks, it's a way of getting the solar panels to track the sun.
Yeah, so by putting one at each of the four corners of the solar panel, they can tilt it any way they want. And the miracle of this is because you're driving it on air pressure, if you've got this huge field full of solar panels, you don't have to control each one. All you have to do is control the same air pressure line to all of them, and they all tilt and track in exactly the same way.
What's the percentage increase in the ability to capture the sunlight?
It's equally good in capturing. It's a price differential.
It's a price. So this is sort of part of the process of driving down the BOS.
It's driving down the
system.
price,
Okay.
yeah, and it's a significant decrease.
Okay, well, let's
Okay.
see, does anyone have any questions? If not, we'll keep talking about other technologies. Well, if you do have questions, come on up to the microphone. There's one right here, but let's proceed. Let's see what else we have.
Okay. Oh, grid batteries. So I mentioned battery storage earlier. So, you know, the batteries that you use in your electronics, your cell phone, your computer, and the ones that are being developed for electric vehicles are all based on lithium battery technology. And the reason for that is you need a lot of energy density. You got to pack a lot of energy into a small space if you're going to carry that battery around. But if you're doing grid scale energy storage, battery is just going to be sitting there out in some big field. It doesn't matter if it's small, it can be big. And so that opens up the possibility to creating batteries that are a lot less expensive. Lithium batteries are pretty expensive, and driving their costs down has been a real issue for electric vehicles. So quite a few of our grid-scale storage systems are working on alternative chemistries. And these two are interesting because they're looking at chemistries that are very inexpensive and very safe. The other problem with lithium batteries is that lithium is kind of a dangerous material. So they're looking at materials that are inexpensive and safe as the basis for their battery technologies. And in this case, both of these teams are working on variants of organic molecules called quinones, kind of like what you have in your tonic water, as the basis of their batteries. And so they have a real opportunity here to create grid-scale batteries that are much, much less expensive, which is one of the keys to getting grid-level storage in place.
Well, I was going to make a joke about gin, but nothing really came to me. And this would be to capture renewable energy and have it available whenever the grids need
So
it. Okay.
this type of thing is really important for microgrids. So if you want to have a small microgrid where you can seal yourself off and deal with the fact that the overall grid has had a big power failure, you want to have your ability to store some energy to carry over that transformational period.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Was there one more?
There was one more. 4.0. This is
Right.
another,
This one I was not really familiar with.
Okay. This is one of the ones from one of our first rounds of funding.
Okay.
And this one is a laser-based drill. So we were very interested. Lots of people are interested in harvesting geothermal energy. There's some geothermal energy that's right near the surface of the Earth, like in Yellowstone Park, the geysers and so on, and volcanoes. But there's a lot more geothermal energy that's much deeper. Unfortunately, to get down there, you have to drill through a lot of hard rock. And if you talk to people who drill, when you're drilling through hard rock, that is a tough business. The drill bits are diamond-studded drill bits, and they're going down through this hard rock, and it's hard, and it just wears those diamond-studded drill bits away, and they just have to keep pulling them out and putting new ones in. So what this team came up with was a real innovation in developing a high-powered laser that they could couple through a fiber optic and put it into a drilling configuration. And they've demonstrated, in fact, we've got a nice little piece of rock drilled out to be a kind of a big ashtray in our office. They've demonstrated that they can make this work, and this is another one of our teams that, following our funding, has gone commercial.
Wouldn't the oil and gas industry be the industry most excited about something like this?
They are selling to the oil and gas industry as well as to geothermal, yeah.
As well as to geothermal.
Yeah.
So they were able to get the ARPA-E grant because there was the geothermal.
Yep.
But okay.
Yeah, many of our technologies have multiple applications.
Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you very, very much for coming to
Yeah.
Austin and to the conference and sharing some of the success stories and the way you approach funding.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And